Now we'll move on to the petition articles. So I'd like to call Ms. Galis back up so she can present her PRD notice. Okay, it's Mark. Okay, I'm sorry, I had it on the... Mr. Galis.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Mark Galis. I live at 62 Prescott Road. I'm here to present Articles 41 and 42 that bear a certain relationship to each other. These relate to a situation where someone applies for a permit to build a PRD, planned residential development. We heard some about that earlier this evening. Those developments can affect the neighborhood, require, I believe, wide town citizen input. They can allow up to double the density that's normally allowed in zoning in an area, so they have a big impact. And because of this, I think that, and because of the way, people are very busy, et cetera, just having to constantly monitor the town webpage for an announcement that there's going to be a hearing after the process has already been started is not really adequate. So I think it'd be great if people who drive by a site know, hey, there's an application, and then they can kind of go to the town website, learn about it, et cetera. So in terms of the mechanics of this, we're basically just adding, proposing to add a line item to the existing section 10 of the PRD portion of the zoning bylaw. Section 10.4.1 is a heading that basically says any person who desires a special permit for a PRD shall submit an application in writing, et cetera, which shall include the following. And we're just saying let's add one more item on there, which is that the applicant should supply design of a sign to be put up visibly at the site. This is kind of independent of the changes that the planning board is proposing in their zoning bylaw amendment. There's no change to this. The item just before it in that list is such additional information as the planning board may determine. So if they wanted to switch those two numbers, 10.4.1.4 and .5 that we're adding, so that the last one is such additional information as the planning board may determine, that'd be fine, same sense of everything. So let's see if we can get this. Hold on a second. I think I went back forward. So as I said, it just requires design of a sign to be installed soon after the application is already submitted, so it's already kind of public record, et cetera. Why shouldn't the public who drives by there, the people in the neighborhood, know that something big may be coming down the road so they can have their input, they can inform themselves? It's true that current law requires abutters to be notified of the public hearing process, but again, these projects can be very big and impact a lot of people. Why shouldn't people know? Again, the intention is just to inform people. It'll encourage people early on. It'll also potentially help developers to get this kind of early feedback, so it isn't kind of dribs and drabs that people are sort of saying, oh, I didn't know this was going on, I didn't know this was going on. They spend a lot of time redesigning and re-architecting and et cetera, et cetera. So, why not get it out in the public right away? Doesn't interfere with the planning board article, as I said, and would apply whether the planning board's endeavors are approved or not. One more comment is that my wife Tanya and I have been kind of mentioning this to people, starting with a few select board members back in October 2018, and I appreciate that the planning board, with all the much more complicated things they've been trying to do, didn't want to tackle one more bylaw, but I think it should be put to the town, whether, this seems like a beneficial idea. And again, the sign should just say, planned residential development special permit application submitted, and you can say anything else the applicant wants to put on it.
Okay.
Any questions for that?
So since this is a petition article, the first round of questions goes to the other members of the board. So do other board members have any questions or comments that they'd like to make on this bylaw amendment? Anything? Okay, I actually have a question, which is, are there any interactions between this and the town's sign bylaw in terms of posting requirements, posting term, types of property that you can post a sign on? and so
Right.
on?
Well, I mentioned that there's this Article 41 and Article 42. So in order to address that concern that had been raised, I think town planner had mentioned it and at a meeting when we sort of brought this up. We're also putting forward by petition Article 42, which will add to the non-zoning regular type of bylaw regulating signage in the town, that this type of sign shall be an allowed usage. This type of sign shall be allowed.
And then what would be the effect of this passing but the next one not passing?
Well, that would be a problem.
Okay.
That would be a problem. But on the other hand, or potential problem. On the other hand, we'll get to the second one, but if the second one passes, then regardless of this one passing, the planning board or the
later,
applicant
we
could
could-
put a sign anywhere, or
Yeah.
could say, we'd
Yeah.
like you to put a sign
Yeah.
as one of the additional
That
requirements.
one works. The
That
other
one works. The
would
other
be
way
more
wouldn't work
trouble.
so well.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So if there are no other questions, you have one?
Sure.
I guess what's probably going to be two questions. So maybe this was somewhere else, or you mentioned it. Is there anything about what the requirement of the size of the sign would be? And the second question, kind of related to that, you mentioned in your in what you were saying that it would need to have planned residential development special permit application submitted, and then you said, and the developer could potentially put something else on there. So I could imagine a sign where the developer has a wonderful image and language, and then at the very bottom says that there. So is there anything that's going to be there to
Okay,
make it clear
well,
what's going in?
It's a good point. So we thought about that, and I think it should be, the words are, it says that the words should be, should include it in a manner legibly visible from the nearest public right-of-way, so they shouldn't be too small. This is part of materials being supplied to the granting, authority. So if it looks like bogus, I think the granting authority would look on that unfavorably. That should be an incentive for the applicant to kind of, play fair. And I'm sorry, there was one other question. Okay. Oh, in terms of the overall size and everything like that, without making it too complicated, the current town sign bylaws puts limits on things. So I think trying to keep it very simple and just kind of get the intent to inform seemed like the best thing, rather than kind of get into lots of details like typeface and, et cetera.
Okay, thank you. So let's move to questions from the public.
Yeah, Ellen Quackenbush, 206 Perry Street. I really love this idea, and to have it to simply be an announcement, planned residential development special permit application submitted. And I think what happens is, as the gentleman said, abutters are notified, but we are seeing in Envision 2030 that we're trying to do a community-wide planning for West Concord and for a lot of Concord towns and subdivisions, parts of the town, and I think this would allow citizens to be aware and think ahead of the, not having to peruse the website, to begin to consider what might be their wishes and what might be best for the town. So I think this is a really great petition, so I support it.
Ruth Lauer, Kais Road. I'm wondering, since the sign would go up when the process begins, would it not be better for the sign to be a standard similar to the big orange placard that comes out with building permits, that sort of standard language, standard sign? You go by, you see an orange placard in a window or on a pole, that it's meaningful, rather than making this something that the applicant can design and it might look absolutely lovely, but it doesn't necessarily convey the message that you are considering to be crucial. I'm wondering if you would consider that. The second question is, are you assuming that notice to the abutters would be the standard planning board notice, X number of feet or yards to define who's an abutter? Or are you thinking just across the street?
Okay, to answer the second one first, well, this is not intended to in any way change notice to abutters or any of the existing laws. This is a totally separate thing. And in answer to your first question, we did think about that, but again, trying to make it very simple, I think we would rely on the permit granting board to sort of judge whether that sign is effective for the purpose of, bringing in public comment, et cetera. So I think a pretty wide latitude would be allowed. I mean, a building permit or something like that may not be. I mean, we thought about building permit and things like that. So that there are cases for existing cases for signs giving kind of notice of that, but we didn't want to really over-specify it. So I think I would leave it to the board to kind of just say, this design looks reasonable, you put that up, okay, that item's checked off, and it's fine, so.
And my final question, why, I think, great idea, but why is it limited to PRDs?
Well, that's another good question. We got to start somewhere. I think the fact that this is the only thing that allows up to 2x density. So, in a place where you have an area of land, a single parcel. If you do a subdivision, you've got to put in, typically, for enough units, you've got to put in roads, you've got restrictions on frontages. If it's not on town sewer, you've got to put in septic, et cetera, et cetera. So you're going to get less than the 1x density that a PRD calculation is based on, assuming there's no wetlands or other kind of restrictions. So the impact could be 2x or 2.5x what a subdivision would be, just in terms of the number of units. Mm-hmm. So to me, it's the low-hanging fruit, and it's something that we've seen recently, that there have been different examples of cases where a lot of citizens were concerned. And from what I've heard, and in fact, Tanya and I were dealing with a situation in the east quarter of town. So many people said, oh, I didn't know that was happening. I didn't know that was happening. So we thought we'd address this one problem.
But in fact, many times abutters, neighbors, people driving by don't know that there's something like a subdivision until they see the road development. Mm-hmm. And you've lost your chance to comment by then. This would be a start, and I would certainly support somebody's efforts for doing similar things on other areas. I mean, you could say anytime there's a special permit, there should be some. There's a lot of ways to think about it, but I think it's hard to put something in front of town that has too many moving parts. That's my feeling. Let's just pick one thing. Thank you very much.
Okay, so now moving to the next petition article, which is Article 42, which is a sign bylaw amendment, which I believe actually has a different percentage required for passage, right? It's only a majority,
it's a standard bylaw.
I believe. Yeah.
And so almost don't need a presentation, but might as well go through it. So to determine whether the town will vote to amend the sign bylaw, which being a standard bylaw would require a 50+% vote, adding to Section 5, which is what lists allowed uses, an item, there's a list going down to 5.I, we'd add a 5.J, notice of proposed planned residential development. So temporary sign notifying the public that an application for a planned residential development special permit has been submitted for that site. Let's see what the next. So this amends the sign bylaw so that the bylaw allows the placement of a sign at a site announcing that a special permit application has been submitted. It's intended to accompany the sign mentioned in the previous article, Article 41, enabling the implementation of Article 41. However, it can also be considered on its own, even if the previous article does not pass, to allow any future, similar endeavors, such as, planning board or ZBA might say, hey, this is going to be an area of high interest. We would like you, the applicant, we'd appreciate it if you, the applicant, would put up a sign, or if the applicant themselves wanted to put up such a sign, it would be a permitted use. That's it. So, any questions?
Questions? Okay, any questions from the board on this? Okay, so seeing none, let's move on to